What happens when three different groups of people go camping in the woods, each unaware that the land they've chosen has its own dark, hidden past? It's a place where the night holds more than just silence. It's a place where shadows move, where footsteps echo from the darkness, and where the forest itself seems to come alive with a terrible purpose. Each of us, unknowingly, stepped into the same nightmare, but none of us were prepared for the horrors that would unfold. This is the story of three separate nights, three separate groups, but one forest that binds us all in terror. And tonight, you'll hear how we all became part of its story. It was supposed to be just a weekend getaway, a chance to get away from the noise of life, to relax, maybe tell stories by the campfire and roast marshmallows under the stars. But that night, something happened that I couldn't explain. Something that followed us back to our campfire. And it wasn't human. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, the kind that clings to your skin, making it feel as if the very ground beneath you is alive. The forest stretched out endlessly in every direction, a mass of shadows and trees with gnarled branches that seemed to twist and claw at the night sky. The leaves rustled gently in the breeze, but beneath that soft sound, there was something else. A faint snap of a twig here, a barely audible shuffle in the underbrush there. It was as though the woods were whispering, urging us to stay alert, though we had no idea what we were meant to be wary of. And then the moon. The full moon hung high above, its light filtering through the thick canopy of trees, but not enough to chase away the darkness that clung to the ground. The moonlight barely kissed the edges of the campfire, and the rest of the woods remained hidden, shrouded in shadows that seemed to deepen with every passing second. It felt as if the trees themselves were closing in, watching us, waiting. We were miles from the nearest ranger station, no cell signal, no other campers for miles. Just us, alone. The only sounds now were the crackling of the campfire and the haunting howls of wolves far off in the distance. Each howl echoed through the woods like a warning, reminding us that we were trespassing in a place where the natural world ruled with no mercy. The world beyond our little circle of light felt distant, unreachable, like it had simply ceased to exist. The fire was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay, and the only thing we had between us and whatever lay hidden in the woods. And then there was that silence, that unsettling quiet that settled in when the wind stopped. For a moment, we thought it was just the night falling still, as it often does. But this silence was different. It was too thick, too heavy, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched, like something is standing just outside the reach of the firelight, waiting for you to make a move. You could feel it, a pressure in the air, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. How many times had we laughed at the old ghost stories we'd heard around campfires when we were younger? How many times had we told ourselves, it's just the wind, it's just your imagination? But that night, the world around us felt wrong. The air was too still, the shadows too deep. And for the first time, none of us felt safe. We tried to settle in, to relax, but the unease was growing, creeping up our spines like a slow, gnawing fear. We sat around the fire, the warmth from the flames pushing against the biting cold of the night, but it didn't quite reach us. Not in our bones, not in the pit of our stomachs. Each of us was lost in our thoughts, but each of us knew that something was off. We weren't alone out here, not in the way we should have been. Then it came, a sound, a low, almost imperceptible scrape. It was distant at first, so faint that we thought we might have imagined it. But then it came again, closer this time. Scratching, a dragging sound like claws on the dirt. No animal made a sound like that, not one we knew. Not one that would hide in the shadows the way this one was. We all stiffened at once, our eyes darting to the edge of the light, searching the darkness. But there was nothing there, just the shadows of trees and the sound of the wind. Or was it the wind? The sound seemed to come from all around us. First the right side, then the left, and then directly behind us. The fire crackled louder, as if it too sensed what was happening, fighting against the unseen forces lurking in the dark. The flames flickered and sputtered, casting long, jagged shadows across the camp. And then there was again, closer. The scraping noise, louder now, unmistakable. It wasn't just the wind anymore. Something was out there, watching us. It started with a strange scratching sound at the edge of our camp. At first, we thought it was just a raccoon or maybe a curious squirrel, the usual suspects that might come poking around when the campfire starts to dim. But as the noise grew louder, it began to sound different. Too deliberate, too measured. It wasn't the frantic skittering of an animal searching for food. No, this was something else. It sounded like it was pacing, circling around us, sizing us up. We all froze, listening. Every one of us. There was no mistaking it now. The sound was getting closer, almost as if it was getting right up to the edge of the light. The crackling of the fire was the only other noise that filled the night. Everything else was still. Too still. We waited, holding our breath. And then nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. It wasn't the peaceful silence you get on a quiet night. No, it was oppressive. It felt like something was out there, waiting for us to move, to make the next move. We exchanged glances, trying to reassure each other, but none of us spoke. Because deep down, we all knew something wasn't right. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the darkness, or maybe it was just the atmosphere of the woods pressing in around us, but I could feel it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, like I wasn't alone, even though we were all sitting there together. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. There was something out there in the darkness, and it wasn't going to let us forget it. We sat there for what felt like hours, but really, it was only a few minutes. A few minutes of pure, unrelenting silence, broken only by the sound of our own hearts pounding in our chests. We tried to tell ourselves it was nothing, that it was just the wind or a trick of the shadows. But then the air shifted. Something wasn't right. The temperature dropped, and the smell of damp earth seemed to grow stronger, suffocating, filling our noses with a musty, stale odor that made it hard to breathe. Even the fire flickered nervously, as though it, too, was afraid of the dark that stretched out beyond our campsite. We couldn't see anything, but I swear I could hear it. The sound of something moving slowly through the brush. The first few steps were faint, as though it was trying to stay hidden. But then it came closer. Too close. I could hear the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath something heavy, moving with deliberate intent. It wasn't animal-like anymore. It was something else. Something that was aware of us. Something that knew we were there. We stared into the shadows, trying to pick out shapes in the darkness, but all we saw was the flickering light from the campfire and the trees stretching into the night. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that our minds were playing tricks on us, but then, suddenly, there's a loud crash from the edge of the campsite, followed by a frantic rustling in the bushes. We jumped, all of us, at the sudden noise. Our hearts raced. We all stood up, instinctively moving closer together around the campfire. Something had moved in the brush. Something big. And it wasn't an animal. Whatever it was as large as a person, maybe bigger. Too big to be anything we'd ever seen before. We all turned, eyes wide, hearts in our throats, searching the darkness. But there was nothing. Nothing but the trees, the shadows, and the wind, howling through the branches. But then the scratching returned. It wasn't the same now. It was louder, closer, almost like it was in the trees above us. We could feel it now. It was watching us. It was there, just outside the circle of firelight, but we couldn't see it. It was waiting for us to make a move, to give it a reason to show itself. And then, just as we were about to call out, to shout into the darkness, a figure stepped into the firelight. But not a person, not a human being. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its skin pale and almost translucent. Its eyes glowing red, like they were burning from within. And in that moment we knew. We weren't alone in the woods. And whatever this thing was, it had been waiting for us. Waiting for the perfect time to make itself known. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a lost hiker. It was something else entirely. And we were trapped. We laughed it off at first, trying to brush away the growing sense of unease, telling ourselves that we were just imagining things. But the truth is, the more we tried to laugh it off, the heavier the air felt. It wasn't just the thickening darkness around us. It was something deeper. A weight, as if the very forest itself was pressing in on us, watching, waiting. Every breath seemed harder to take. The fire, once so comforting, now felt too small, too fragile against the vastness of the woods closing in around us. Then it happened. We saw it. A flicker in the corner of our eyes, a movement too quick, too fluid to be human. In the shadows of the trees, just beyond the reach of the firelight, something shifted. It wasn't a figure you'd expect to see. No hiker, no animal. It was something else. The way it moved, too smoothly, too unnaturally fast, like it was gliding, not walking. Its form barely registered against the dark backdrop of the forest, but it was there. A shadow in the night. It passed between the trees with no sound. No rustling of branches. Just movement. We turned our heads, all of us, instinctively. But when we looked back to the same spot, there was nothing there. The shadows were still. Nothing moved. Nothing at all. Just the flickering campfire and the steady hum of the night, as if nothing had ever happened. We all exchanged glances, uneasy smiles creeping across our faces, trying to convince ourselves it was just our imagination. But the doubt in our minds grew. It wasn't a raccoon or some curious deer. No, this was different. The way it moved, there was no sound. No footfalls. Nothing natural. I could feel it in my gut. Something was out there, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Then, just as we were about to brush it off again, the sounds returned. At first, it was subtle, like a whisper through the trees. Just the rustling of leaves, or so we thought. But then it came again, closer this time, and louder. The unmistakable sound of something, or someone, moving through the underbrush. I felt it then, that gnawing unease in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. Whatever it was coming closer. Too close. Was it a lost hiker? A group of campers messing with us, playing some twisted prank? No, I didn't think so. The way the noise moved, the way it circled us, it wasn't human. Not like that. It wasn't a person trying to sneak up on us. It wasn't an animal either. The scratching, the dragging, it was too deliberate, too controlled. We tried to convince ourselves it was just the wind, that the woods were playing tricks on our minds. But the feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. The sound wasn't just random, it was getting closer, moving deliberately in a circle around us. We could hear it from all sides now, coming closer, then stopping, only to start again from another direction. The worst part was that we couldn't see anything. No shape in the shadows, no movement in the trees, just the sounds, the constant, grinding sounds of something, or someone, circling us in the dark. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, breathing, moving. The forest wasn't just a backdrop to our camping trip anymore. It was a trap, and we were the prey. We didn't know what to do. We could have stayed and called out, but the thought of drawing attention to ourselves made my blood run cold. The woods were too silent, too quiet, and then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of something heavy, something large, moving through the brush. It was too much. The branches cracked under the weight of it, snapping loudly in the stillness. And then nothing. There was a quietness that settled over us, a stillness that felt off. The kind of stillness you get when the world holds its breath, too heavy, too thick. The rustling of the leaves, the crackling of the fire, the howls of wolves in the distance, all of it stopped, as if the forest itself had paused, waiting. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was unnatural. And in that moment, we realized it wasn't the night's silence. It was something else. Something watching us. That's when we heard it. A howl. A single, deep, guttural sound that echoed through the trees, cutting through the silence like a knife. It was low at first, almost too faint to hear. But as it grew louder, we realized it wasn't the sound of wolves. It was something deeper, darker. And in that moment, I felt it. Something was closing in on us. We were being hunted. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was something far worse. A figure emerged from the trees, tall, impossibly tall, its body thin, its limbs elongated, as if it were not built for this world. Its skin pale, almost translucent, like it was barely more than a shadow wrapped in a human-like form. I could see the bones beneath, the faint outline of veins running like black rivers through its thin, stretched skin. But what I remember most, what I will never forget, were its eyes. Those eyes, they were glowing red, like burning embers, and they were staring right at us from the darkness. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched, cold, unfeeling, like they were staring into the depths of our souls. It was no longer trying to hide. It was out in the open now, and there was no turning back. It was watching, waiting for the perfect moment. We couldn't move. We couldn't speak. Our bodies felt frozen, as if the very air around us had thickened and turned to stone. The creature, it wasn't just standing there. It was waiting for us to make the next move, to give it a reason to act. And that moment came faster than we could have ever imagined. Before we could even react, it started moving, but not like anything we had ever seen. It didn't walk. It didn't shuffle. It glided, slowly, smoothly, like it wasn't even touching the ground. Its movements were unnatural, too fluid, too precise. And as it moved closer, the air around us grew colder. A biting cold that sank deep into our bones, making it hard to breathe. The campfire sputtered. The light flickered and dimmed as if it couldn't fight the darkness anymore. And then in an instant, the fire went out. The crackling stopped. The light vanished. The only thing left was the creature, moving ever closer through the pitch-black night, and the deafening silence that filled the space around us. That's when we heard it. A sound so low, so guttural, it seemed to come from all around us. Not from the creature itself, but from the very air, like it was part of the forest, part of the darkness. A growl that vibrated in your chest, a sound that told you in no uncertain terms that you were no longer in control, that the world you thought you knew was gone. It was like something from the deepest, most ancient part of the earth. It was a growl that didn't belong to any animal, any living creature we knew. It was too low, too haunting. It rumbled through the ground, through the trees, through the very air itself, vibrating in our chests as we stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. The thing kept moving toward us, gliding through the darkness, its red eyes locked onto ours. And the closer it got, the colder the air became. My breath fogged in front of me, and my skin went numb. My legs shook, but I couldn't run. None of us could. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on us, suffocating us. Then, just as it was almost upon us, the growl stopped. The creature stopped moving. It stood there in the darkness, still, its eyes glowing in the night. I thought for a second that maybe, just maybe, it was going to leave. That maybe this nightmare was over. But then, without warning, it spoke. Not in a language. Not in any sound I could understand. It was more like a whisper, a low, growling whisper that seemed to come from deep inside the earth. The sound slithered into my mind, and I felt my blood run cold. It said, "You shouldn't have come." We ran. We didn't think. We didn't look back. We just ran, through the trees, through the brush, over the rough ground, until we found ourselves standing in the clearing, gasping for breath. I don't know how we made it out of those woods alive. I don't know how we didn't stop, how we didn't break down in fear. We just kept running, every one of us in total panic. But when we finally made it to the road, when we were standing in the pale light of the morning, there was nothing. No creature, no glowing eyes, no growl. It was as though it had never been there at all. But even though the creature was gone, the fear never left us. It followed us home. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there. Something that watched us that night. Something that's been waiting for the right moment to return. No matter where I go, I feel its eyes on me. We thought it was over. We thought we had escaped. But every night since, every night without fail, I hear it, the faint scratching, just like that first night. At first, it was soft, a whisper against the walls, a light dragging sound like claws on the wood. But now it's louder. It's closer, and it's not outside the camp anymore. It's in my room. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's following me, but I hear it, every night. I try to tell myself it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I know that whatever was in those woods is still waiting for me. We ran, but as we reached the safety of the road, the creature was already gone. By morning, everything seemed normal again, too normal. But the fear, the chill that had settled in my bones that night, never left. And now, every time I close my eyes, I can't shake the feeling that whatever we encountered is still watching, waiting. I thought I was free, but maybe it's only just begun. There are nights when everything seems normal. You're out in the open, surrounded by nothing but nature, the stars above, and the faint crackle of a campfire to keep you company. But sometimes it's those moments, those seemingly ordinary nights, that become the ones you can never forget. In the woods, on any given night, the wind carries whispers you might miss if you're not listening closely. The trees, heavy with years of stories, seem to shift with a language only they understand. I've heard it before many times. We all have. But it wasn't until that night, that weekend in the woods, when everything changed. That's when we started noticing the oddities, the things we couldn't explain. It began subtly, almost like a warning, soft but growing louder with each step we took. What followed was a series of strange occurrences, stories that at first seemed isolated, but as the night deepened, as the moments stretched longer, we realized they were all connected. Each event, each chilling moment, leading to another. A puzzle we didn't know how to solve, a darkness we couldn't understand. What happened next? Well, let's start from the beginning. It was just supposed to be a camping trip, a break from the busy lives we led, a simple getaway. But soon enough, it became clear that some trips lead you somewhere darker, somewhere you never expected. We set up camp by the old oak trees. There's something about that area, something unsettling. The trees stretch higher than any I'd ever seen before, their twisted branches gnarled like fingers reaching up to the sky. The fire, small but bright, crackled as it sent sparks into the night air. Around it, the ground was soft, but the leaves beneath our feet felt like they were crunching louder than they should have been, almost as if the earth itself was protesting our presence. The forest was still, too still. The wind whispered through the trees, but the sound was soft, almost careful, as if it was trying to keep something hidden. I looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, more than I'd ever seen in the city, their cold light shimmering above us. But something about that night's sky seemed off. It wasn't the same vast, peaceful expanse I'd grown used to. There was a heaviness to it, like something was waiting just beyond our reach. We were sitting around the fire, Jake poking at the flames, Sarah watching the dancing embers, when I first heard it. A rustle, barely audible, but there. It was as though something had stepped on a dry branch or crushed a leaf, but there was no wind. "Did you hear that?" I asked, keeping my voice low, not wanting to seem paranoid. Jake just shrugged. He didn't hear it, or if he did, he didn't care. But I felt it. My pulse quickened, and I tried to tell myself it was just an animal. A deer maybe, or a raccoon. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was different. Something wasn't right. I looked over at Sarah. She was staring out into the darkness beyond the firelight, her expression unreadable. She must have heard it too. Her eyes darted around nervously, her hand gripping the hem of her jacket, like she was ready to move at any moment. But she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The air grew colder, and the flames of the fire seemed to flicker strangely. Shadows cast by the campfire stretched long and crooked, bending in ways that didn't seem natural. I remember watching them move, and for the first time that night I felt watched. The sensation crept over me, cold and prickling, like fingers brushing my skin. The others seemed oblivious. Sarah laughed nervously, pointing at a shadow she thought she saw flickering behind one of the trees. But the more I looked, the more I realized there was something just beyond the reach of the firelight. Something moving, something waiting. The night was too quiet, and yet it wasn't. Every crack of a branch, every movement in the brush, every gust of wind felt amplified in the stillness. I found myself jumping at shadows, watching the trees just a little too long, certain that something was there, something hidden behind the branches, watching us, waiting for us. Then, without warning, the rustling returned. Louder this time, closer. It wasn't just the wind anymore. It was as if something was circling us, stepping just beyond the firelight, retreating when we looked, only to come closer when we weren't paying attention. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew one thing for certain: we weren't alone. It was supposed to be just a break, a simple getaway from the chaos of our everyday lives, a chance to escape. The weekend was meant to be a time for fresh air, laughter, and memories that didn't involve endless meetings or city noise. Just nature. Just us. There was me, of course, the one telling you this story now. I wasn't anything special, just a regular guy, trying to get away from the grind like everyone else. And then there was Jake, my best friend for years. We'd been through everything together, from high school pranks to late night talks about our futures. He was the kind of guy who'd say, "Let's go for a hike," and mean it no matter how far. Always up for an adventure. He had that laugh, the loud, unapologetic kind. He never let anything get under his skin. I guess you could call him the fearless one, or at least, that's what I used to think. Then there was Sarah. We didn't know each other that well, not at the start. I met her at a friend's barbecue a few months before the trip. She seemed easygoing, someone who didn't mind going with the flow, which made her perfect for this kind of trip. She was quiet at first, but once she got comfortable, she had this infectious way of laughing, like she didn't have a care in the world. She seemed different from Jake and me in some ways. More thoughtful, if that's the right word. You could see it in the way she watched people, how she noticed small details others missed. The three of us, we were eager. We were ready to leave everything behind for just a weekend of simplicity, of freedom. No deadlines, no expectations. We even joked about how we were going to survive in the wilderness. Who could pitch the best tent, who would start the fire first, who would make the worst coffee. We joked about how we'd be so out of touch with the world that we wouldn't care about emails or social media updates for 2 days. It felt good. It felt right. But we had no idea that our excitement would soon turn into something else entirely. Something we weren't prepared for. We packed our gear, laughed as we argued about who had packed too much, and drove away from the city, excited and a little nervous. The air felt fresh the moment we left the highway, and the drive was scenic, just open roads, trees, and endless stretches of countryside. Sarah talked about how she loved the peace of the wilderness. Jake made fun of her for it, calling her a nature lover, as if that was something to be ashamed of. But I think we all felt it. The calm, the stillness. It was exactly what we needed. That was the first part of the trip, and everything seemed normal. But that was before the sun set. That was before the shadows grew longer than they should have. We didn't realize it then, but our trip wasn't just about nature and freedom. We were about to be pulled into something far bigger. Something none of us would ever forget. The night had fallen quietly around us. The sky above was an endless stretch of ink, dotted with the faint glow of distant stars. The firelight flickered, casting long, uneven shadows across the campsite. We'd gathered around the fire, the warmth of the flames pushing against the coolness of the evening air. The laughter from earlier still echoed in my mind, but something had shifted. Something I couldn't quite place. Jake was fiddling with the firewood, adding logs to keep the flames going. Sarah, ever the observer, had her eyes turned toward the trees at the edge of our camp. She'd been quiet for a while, and I noticed she was fidgeting with her sleeves, the way people do when they're anxious but don't want to admit it. I shot her a glance, but she only half smiled and looked away. And then it started. At first, it was just a rustling sound, soft, almost imperceptible. It came from the far side of the campsite, where the trees grew denser, where the darkness seemed to stretch deeper. My eyes darted to the spot, trying to make sense of it. Was it the wind? It didn't seem like it. The air had grown still, no breeze to carry the sound. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my imagination. But then it happened again, this time louder. A dry, crackling noise, like something brushing against the undergrowth. Something, or someone, was moving out there, just beyond the reach of our firelight. I glanced at Jake. His back was turned as he added another log to the fire, completely unaware of the sounds. I was about to say something, but then I saw it. A shadow. It flickered along the tree line, quick and unnatural. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks, the flickering fire casting odd shapes against the backdrop of trees. But no, this shadow, it didn't match the movement of the fire. It was too fluid, too deliberate. Sarah's head snapped to the side, and she froze, her eyes wide. She saw it too. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach, cold and heavy. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't just a shadow. There was something out there, something watching us. Jake looked over at Sarah, then at me. "What's going on?" Before I could say anything, the rustling returned. But this time it was closer, much closer. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as my heart began to race. Jake must have heard it too, because he stopped what he was doing and looked toward the noise. But unlike Sarah and me, he wasn't terrified. He stood there for a moment, staring into the dark, before shaking his head. "It's probably just a deer, or maybe a raccoon. Relax." But the tension in the air was thick, too thick to ignore. We all felt it. The forest seemed to have closed in on us, as if the trees themselves were pressing in, watching with dark eyes. A few seconds passed before Sarah finally spoke again. "It doesn't sound like an animal," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's too deliberate." Jake gave her a dismissive look. "Come on, Sarah. There's no need to freak out." He walked toward the edge of the camp, toward the trees, hoping to prove her wrong. But as soon as his foot hit the ground, the rustling stopped. And then silence. A heavy, unnatural silence that seemed to swallow the entire campsite. The fire flickered violently, as if something had disturbed the air. The crackling flames, which had been comforting moments ago, now seemed to hiss with a strange urgency. I glanced back at Sarah, who was watching Jake intently. Her eyes were wide, her hand clutching the edge of her jacket as if she wanted to flee, but was too afraid to move. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something that didn't belong. Something that wasn't an animal. "Maybe we should pack up," Sarah suggested quietly, her voice barely audible. Jake rolled his eyes, but I could see the hesitation in his movements. He wasn't laughing now. He stood still, his eyes scanning the trees, trying to see past the thick dark. "You really think we should leave? It's probably just a bad sound. Nothing to worry about." But even as he said it, the rustling began again. Louder this time. Closer. My chest tightened. I could feel it. The presence. It was closing in on us, and there was no denying it anymore. Whatever was out there, it wasn't here by accident. It was deliberate. It was hunting us. Jake, now visibly uncomfortable, turned toward the sound. "All right, that's enough," he muttered, stepping cautiously toward the woods. And then, just as quickly as it had started, everything fell silent again. No rustling, no sounds, just the flickering of the fire. The sharp, empty quietness hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. We all stood frozen for a long moment, unsure what to do next. The forest seemed to be waiting too, still and quiet, as if it knew we weren't ready for what was to come next. The night seemed to drag on forever. The silence after the rustling was oppressive, and the forest felt too quiet. We kept glancing nervously at the trees, as if waiting for something to jump out at us. The fire crackled weakly, casting more shadows than it should have, and the wind, what little of it there was, began to pick up again, but it felt wrong. It was like the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to make the next move. We tried to shake off the feeling. We tried to keep talking, to laugh it off, but the words felt forced. Sarah kept glancing into the darkness, her eyes darting nervously, her face pale. Even Jake, who had always been the brave one, seemed uneasy now. I could see it in the way his hands trembled as he adjusted the fire, the way he kept scanning the edges of the campsite, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. And then it happened again. A soft rustling, too quiet to be the wind, but loud enough to send a shiver down my spine. This time, it was coming from the other side of the camp. The noise was different, deeper, almost as if something, or someone, was moving around us, getting closer with each step. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, but Sarah didn't answer. She was already on her feet, eyes wide with fear. Jake looked over at her, then at me. His face was hard to read, his usual bravado gone. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," he muttered. "If someone's out there messing with us, we need to just call it a night and head back." But as soon as he spoke, the rustling stopped. Just stopped. The air grew thicker. The fire flickered again, stronger this time, as if something was moving right behind it. I stood up, my eyes darting toward the trees, trying to see through the wall of darkness. My chest tightened. I knew what I was thinking, but I didn't want to say it aloud. Whatever was out there wasn't just watching us, it was moving with purpose. It was getting closer, and it wasn't an animal. Sarah looked at me, her face almost pleading. "Can we leave? Please?" But before I could answer, the temperature dropped. A sudden, icy gust of wind cut through the camp, and the fire sputtered, sending a shower of sparks into the air. And that's when I saw it. At the edge of the camp, standing just beyond the reach of the firelight, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but as I squinted, I saw it move slowly, deliberately toward us. It was tall, impossibly tall, with its body shrouded in darkness. The firelight flickered again, casting it in an almost unreal glow, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw its eyes. Eyes that glowed in the dark, a pale, unnatural light, almost like they were burning from within. I froze. I couldn't move. The figure stepped forward, just a little closer. It was so quiet. No footsteps. No sounds. Just the crunch of the leaves beneath it, so soft it was barely noticeable. "Who's there?" Jake called out, his voice hoarse, a hint of panic creeping in. The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, still, unmoving, staring at us from the edge of the firelight. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that I thought I might pass out. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared into the trees. Gone. We all stood there in stunned silence, the only sound the faint crackling of the fire. "What the hell was that?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. But none of us had an answer. We checked our surroundings, but there was nothing. No footprints, no traces, no movement in the trees. Just the silence of the night. But that didn't make sense. How could something so solid, so real, just vanish like that? I looked over at Sarah. She was trembling, her eyes wide and filled with fear, her breath coming out in quick, shallow gasps. She was clutching her arms around herself, as if trying to hold on to something, trying to convince herself this was just a bad dream. "Maybe we should just go," she whispered. And for a moment, I agreed. But then the sound came again. A snap, a twig breaking, loud in the stillness just behind us. I whipped around, heart in my throat, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement. Just more darkness, more silence. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. I didn't know what it was, but I knew we were not alone. The campfire flickered once more, its light seeming to dance violently, like it was trying to tell us something. I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm done," I said, voice shaking. "Let's get out of here." But as we started to pack up, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the trees. It was low, guttural, and inhuman, cutting through the night like a knife. My blood ran cold as the scream tore through the air. It was as if the forest itself had just screamed. I froze again, not sure if I was hearing things, but the look on Jake's face told me I wasn't. He was already backing up, his hands up in a defensive gesture, eyes wide with terror. "We need to go. Now," he yelled, his voice breaking. But we didn't get far. The scream came again, closer this time, louder, more intense, and somehow angrier. I turned back to look at the forest, my eyes scanning the dark trees, the shadows, the shifting shapes. But there was nothing there, just the darkness. And that sense of something, someone still watching us, closing in. The tension in the air was thick now. The wind was howling, and the fire sputtered weakly, casting strange shadows that seemed to move without reason. The forest was alive with a presence I couldn't understand, and in the back of my mind I knew it was only a matter of time before it came for us. We had no time to think. The scream that had torn through the forest, still rang in my ears. The very air felt thick with it, and my heartbeat thundered in my chest, drowning out everything else. I looked at Sarah, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Her breath was shallow, as if she couldn't get enough air. Jake was already moving, his hands shaking as he stuffed his things into his bag, his eyes darting nervously around the campsite. But we didn't make it far. We barely had the chance to react when it happened again. A figure appeared, not in the shadows this time, but standing directly in front of us. The firelight flickered, casting its glow on what we were all dreading to see. The figure was tall, far taller than any man I'd ever seen, its limbs unnaturally long. It was draped in something that looked like a dark cloak, but it wasn't the fabric that caught my attention. It was its face, or what could only be described as a face. The eyes, those eyes glowed, but not in a way that was beautiful or mysterious. No, these eyes burned with an unnatural, sickly yellow light, hollow and endless. They locked onto mine with such intensity that I felt paralyzed, like I was staring into the void, and it was staring right back at me. My stomach lurched, and for the first time that night, I couldn't breathe. It was as if the life was being sucked out of me, each second more suffocating than the last. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My mouth opened, but no sound left my lips, as if my very voice had been stolen. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there watching us. The forest had fallen deathly quiet. Even the wind had stopped, leaving only the crackling of the fire in the silence. But we could feel it. We could feel the presence that surrounded us, pressing in from all sides. The trees felt closer, the shadows deeper. Sarah tried to step back, her feet unsteady, her breathing erratic. "WH, what is it?" she stammered, barely able to get the words out. Her voice cracked, thin and fragile in the oppressive silence. Jake, never one to shy away from danger, tried to stand his ground. He called out, his voice shaking with something I hadn't heard before, fear. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. But there was no answer, no movement, just the dark eyes watching us. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Each step it took seemed to suck the warmth from the air, leaving a coldness in its wake. I could hear the sound of its feet, slow, measured, unnatural, like a whisper in the night, soft but so heavy with purpose. That's when I felt it, the shift. Something had changed. The ground beneath our feet seemed to shift, as if the earth itself was warping around us. The trees seemed to bend, as if they were leaning in, as if the whole forest was moving, closing in on us, trapping us. Jake moved forward, taking a step toward the figure, his hands outstretched. But before he could get closer, the air crackled, and something dark, so dark it couldn't have come from the night, ripped through the air like a soundless shriek. I saw it then, a shadowy, distorted shape, like a twisting, writhing mass that was part of the figure, but not. It was as if the figure wasn't entirely human, but something more, something that had taken form in this twisted, nightmarish way. The figure's face shifted then. What had once been a blank, featureless mask now moved, contorting into something else, something monstrous, something that shouldn't have been able to exist in our world. Its eyes, those burning, sickly yellow eyes, burned brighter now, searing into our souls. It was too much. It was all too much. I felt my chest tighten again, my body frozen, as if my limbs had turned to stone. The fire flickered wildly, as though it was fighting against the presence in front of us, trying to push it away, but it wasn't enough. The flames crackled and hissed, and in that moment, I realized that the fire wasn't just failing to protect us. It was as if it was being pulled into the darkness, slowly, consumed by the very thing we feared. I saw Jake take a step back, his face going white as he finally realized what we were up against. His voice was barely a whisper. We need to go. Now. But it was too late. The figure lunged forward, and in that moment, everything seemed to happen at once. The trees screamed, the ground trembled, and the air itself seemed to rupture with a deafening roar that wasn't a sound, but a force. I felt it. The pressure in the air, the force pushing against us, knocking us back with its weight. We tried to run. We turned, frantic, our limbs barely moving, as if something was dragging us back. But as we ran, I saw it again, the eyes. They followed us. Every step we took, it was closer, coming for us. My mind raced, my heart pounding so fast I could barely hear anything else. But all I could think was, if we don't get out now, we won't make it through the night. I reached for Sarah, pulling her forward, but my grip faltered. She wasn't moving. Her feet were stuck in place, her body frozen, her eyes wide with terror. "Sarah, come on. Move." I shouted, but she didn't respond. It was as if she couldn't hear me. It was like she was lost in those eyes, staring at them as if they held her captive. In a desperate attempt to break her out of it, I grabbed her arm, pulling her along, my fingers gripping her skin, trying to break through the fog of fear. But even then, the ground beneath us felt like it was giving way. The shadows seemed to crawl around us, pulling at our feet, tugging us toward the dark figure that had become the night. We reached the edge of the woods, but the trees were different now. They weren't the same ones we'd set up camp near. The path had shifted. The forest had changed. It wasn't our way out anymore. And that's when it spoke. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, a low, guttural whisper that tore through my very soul. It was a voice that was not made for human ears, a voice that didn't belong in this world. "You cannot escape," it said. And in that moment I knew. We were trapped in the forest, with no way out, and whatever that thing was, it would never let us leave. We ran. We didn't think. We didn't stop. We just ran. The road seemed endless, stretching on, offering no real escape, no safety. The trees blurred behind us, the shadowy figure still there, lurking, watching. Every time I turned, I thought I saw it, its glowing eyes just beyond the reach of the streetlights, waiting for the right moment to come for us. But we didn't stop. We kept moving, our feet pounding the dirt road, desperate to put distance between ourselves and the nightmare that had followed us from the woods. Our breaths came out in frantic gasps, but no matter how fast we ran, the feeling of being followed never left us. When we finally reached the car, the light from the headlights seemed too dim, as if the very air around us was heavy with something we couldn't escape. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so violently I thought he might drop them. But he finally got the door open. We piled in without a word, slamming the doors shut as if the world outside was ready to swallow us whole. Jake floored the accelerator, the car lurching forward. We sped down the road, tearing through the night. The forest, the trees, the shadows, they were all behind us now, or so we thought. But then the engine sputtered. The car jolted once, twice, and then it stalled. I felt the blood drain from my face. We were miles away from the campsite. There was no reason for the car to stop, no reason at all. "What's happening? Why won't it start?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. Jake turned the key again, desperately trying to get the engine running, but it was useless. The car wouldn't budge. The night around us seemed to get colder, the wind picking up, rattling the windows. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, as if something was watching us from the dark. "We need to get out," I said, my voice low. But Jake was shaking his head. "No, we stay in the car. We wait. We'll be fine." But I knew that it wasn't over. It wasn't over just because we left the campsite. It wasn't over just because we got into the car. Whatever that thing was, it was here with us. We weren't safe. Then, the rustling started again. Just like before, quiet at first, almost inaudible, but growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something else, something far worse. I turned to Sarah, whose eyes were wide with terror. She looked as if she had seen something I couldn't. "Sarah, what is it?" I whispered. She didn't answer. She was staring out of the window, frozen. I followed her gaze, and my stomach sank. Standing at the edge of the road, right where the trees met the darkness, was the figure. It was standing still, just beyond the reach of the headlights, its glowing eyes locked on the car. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was unmistakable. I could feel it in my bones. My heart was pounding in my chest as I turned to Jake, my voice shaking. "We have to go. Now. Start the car." Jake's hands were trembling as he twisted the key once more. The engine sputtered again, but it wouldn't start. He cursed under his breath. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching. And then slowly it began to walk towards us. Each step was deliberate, almost too slow, like it was savoring the moment. Like it was taking its time, knowing it had us trapped. We were stuck. No way out. Please, please God, start the car, I begged under my breath. But the car wouldn't start. The headlights flickered and dimmed, and the night seemed to close in around us, swallowing the world outside. Then came the whisper, that same guttural voice that had haunted us from the woods. "You cannot escape," it said, its voice low and commanding. My blood ran cold. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. Then silence. The figure had stopped moving. It stood there, just outside the light, watching us. Its presence filled the space, heavy and suffocating, like it was waiting for us to make the next move. Like it knew it had us cornered. Suddenly, Jake slammed his fist against the steering wheel, the sound of it loud in the stillness. Come on, he screamed, but it didn't matter. We were trapped, and the figure, it wasn't going to let us leave. I turned my head, staring into the darkness. The rustling had stopped, but now there was something else. Something in the shadows. Something behind the trees. The darkness itself seemed to shift. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't need to look. I already knew. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was alive, and it was closing in on us. I felt the car jolt again, but it wasn't from the engine. It felt like the ground had moved beneath us, like the very earth was shifting. I turned back to the figure. It was gone, but I could still feel its presence, still see its burning eyes in the back of my mind, as if it had never left. It was still watching us. It was always watching us. The engine roared to life suddenly, startling me, and Jake slammed his foot on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, speeding down the road. We didn't say a word, didn't even look at each other. We just drove. Hours passed. I don't know how long we were driving. The road stretched on endlessly, the trees thinning out, the night growing darker. I thought we had escaped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't done, that the thing, whatever it was, hadn't finished with us. It had only let us go for now. As the sun began to rise, we pulled into a gas station, the first place that felt safe in hours. We were still shaken, still breathing heavily, trying to process what had happened. But then, I saw it. It wasn't in front of us. It wasn't in the rearview mirror. It was in the reflection of the window. I saw the figure standing just outside the gas station, watching us. We weren't safe, and it wasn't over. We made it out of the woods, but the terror of that night never left us. We thought we had escaped, thought we had outrun the nightmare. But every time we looked into the darkness, into the shadows where the trees stood tall, we saw him. Or it. Watching. Waiting. The figure had followed us. We thought the road was our salvation, but in the end, we were just running from something we couldn't escape. Every corner we turned, every quiet moment, every stretch of shadow, it was there, a constant reminder that some things don't let go. They don't fade away. And sometimes, no matter how far you run, the nightmare will always be with you. As the sun set, I realized the truth. We weren't free. Not really. And we never would be. The night had begun like any other camping trip. The sky above us stretched out in a blanket of black, dotted with stars. The air smelled fresh, with the earthy scent of damp soil and pine needles. Our campsite was tucked in the middle of the woods, a perfect spot for some peace and quiet. But as the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows on the ground, something started to feel off. It wasn't the sounds you'd expect in the woods, those familiar noises that calm you and make you feel at home. No, the usual rustling of leaves, the soft hoots of an owl in the distance, the occasional crack of a branch. They were all there, but they were muted. Faint, distant, like they were being swallowed up by something much larger. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of something burning. It didn't belong. It wasn't the fire we had set, that much was clear. As the flames flickered, the shadows grew long and stretched across the campsite, playing tricks on the eyes. For a moment, the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, flickering in unnatural ways. The firelight couldn't quite reach the edges of the campsite, and in that darkened space, something felt wrong. The sound of the wind through the trees, which should have been soothing, was now unsettling. It whispered, but the words weren't clear, like a message that couldn't quite reach our ears, but was intended for us all the same. The air was colder now, the temperature dropping without explanation. We all felt it at the same time, but no one spoke about it at first. A sense of unease settled over us, thick and heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The distant howl of a wolf echoed faintly through the valley, and for a second, it almost sounded off. Not quite like the howl of a wolf, but something darker, more guttural. Something in the woods wasn't natural, but we didn't know what it was. And then, just as I was about to dismiss the feeling as nothing more than nerves, it happened. A rustle. A sound barely audible, but enough to make us all stop and listen. It came from the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the firelight. It wasn't the soft shuffle of an animal, as we had expected. It was deliberate, steady, a weight to the movement, a pacing that seemed to match our own, as if something was circling, watching us. The wind picked up, rattling the branches above us, but the rustle of those footsteps, they didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, but no one was there. We turned to each other, our faces half lit by the fire. Sarah, her eyes wide and her lips trembling, was the first to speak. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. But no one answered. It was too much to say out loud. We all heard it, but none of us wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. The fire popped and crackled louder, as if trying to drown out the creeping silence that had settled between us. We tried to laugh it off, to reassure ourselves it was just an animal. But deep down we all knew. Something was watching us. The woods were no longer a peaceful haven. No, they had become a place where something was waiting. And we were just beginning to realize that we weren't alone. There was Mike. He was the one who always took the lead, the one who would jump into any adventure with a smile and a laugh. He'd heard the stories, the campfire tales, and loved every minute of them. He was always the tough guy, the one who wouldn't let anything get under his skin. If there was a noise in the woods, Mike would scoff and say, "It's just nature. Nothing to be afraid of." He was the one who suggested we go further into the woods for a night under the stars, and everyone eagerly followed his lead. But tonight, even Mike's bravado was starting to crack. His usual jokes about the rustling sounds had stopped. Instead, he kept glancing at the trees, at the darkness that stretched beyond the reach of our campfire. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, though he tried hard to hide it with his usual grin. Then there was Sarah. Sarah had always been the sensitive one, the one who seemed to feel things a little more deeply than the rest of us. She didn't like camping at first, always felt that something was off about the woods, but she'd agreed to come along anyway, partly for the company, partly because she wanted to face her fears. She was the first to notice how the wind had changed, the first to feel the chill in the air. "It's too quiet," she had said earlier, almost in a whisper, but we all shrugged it off. As the evening wore on, I watched her pull her jacket tighter, huddling closer to the fire. Her eyes were darting back and forth, scanning the shadows, and her fingers were trembling. No one said anything, but we all knew. Something wasn't right. Sarah wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. When she said something was off, we paid attention. But she hadn't said anything since then. She just kept watching the trees, her face growing paler with each passing minute. And then there was me. I had come out here to escape, to disconnect from everything that weighed on me. The noise of the world, the rush of everyday life. I thought a night in the woods would help clear my head. I was used to the sounds of nature, the quiet stillness that came with being away from the city. I wasn't afraid of the dark. But that night, as the fire flickered and the shadows stretched longer than they should, I felt it too. The growing unease, the creeping feeling of something waiting, something just beyond the light, watching us. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the typical camping jitters. But deep down I knew. This was different. We weren't alone. I could feel it. And no matter how hard I tried to push that feeling away, it wouldn't leave. It gnawed at the edges of my mind, growing stronger with every crackle of the fire, every rustle of the trees. Mike laughed nervously, trying to make light of it. "We're just scaring ourselves," he said, but the tremor in his voice gave him away. He walked toward the edge of the campsite, shining the flashlight into the darkness, pretending like nothing was wrong. Sarah just stared into the shadows, her body stiff, eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or something darker. And me? I couldn't take my eyes off the trees either. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, but the longer I stared, the more I realized. Whatever was out there, whatever was making that sound, it wasn't just the wind. I don't know what happened next. Maybe it was the combination of Mike's bravado cracking, Sarah's silent fear, or the sheer weight of the atmosphere around us. But I could feel the tension building. It was suffocating, like the woods themselves were closing in on us. We were no longer just a group of friends on a camping trip. We were trespassers, and the woods had made sure we knew it. Our voices were lower now, quieter, as if speaking too loudly might provoke whatever was out there. But the more we tried to ignore it, the more we tried to dismiss the tension, the more real it became. Mike's voice broke the silence again, but this time, there was no confidence in his words. "I'll go check it out," he said, his hand gripping the flashlight so tightly his knuckles were white. I didn't want him to go. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me. But I didn't stop him. None of us did. It was almost as if we were all waiting for something, waiting for it to happen, even though none of us knew what it was. And as Mike disappeared into the darkness, the rest of us stayed behind, our hearts racing, barely daring to breathe as we waited for something to happen. And then a noise. A strange, low sound that echoed through the woods. It wasn't the rustling of the trees anymore. No, this was something else. Something worse. I looked at Sarah. She didn't say anything, but I could see the fear in her eyes. And me? I was frozen. There was no denying it anymore. We were no longer in control. The forest had taken over. The tension that had been building in the air suddenly seemed to snap, like a stretched wire that couldn't take any more pressure. It all started with a rustle, a faint sound, at first barely audible over the crackling fire. We all froze, turning our heads toward the noise. It wasn't the usual sound of a small animal skittering through the underbrush, the way squirrels or rabbits might move around. This was different. It was deliberate. Slow. Too slow for an animal. "Probably just a raccoon," Mike muttered, trying to brush it off, his voice not quite as confident as before. But even he wasn't sure. He grabbed the flashlight again, his hand trembling slightly. "I'll go take a look," he said. But something in his voice, the way he paused before speaking, told me he didn't believe it was a raccoon either. He walked toward the edge of the camp, his boots crunching on the ground as he moved into the shadows. We could still hear the rustling, but now it was different. It wasn't just one sound. It was as though something or someone was moving closer, but without making a single visible move. The wind stopped for a moment, as though the entire forest had gone still. Then came the sound again. Footsteps, distinct now, closer. The kind of sound you'd expect from someone walking through the leaves. But the steps weren't hurried. They were slow, deliberate. Mike stopped dead in his tracks, the beam of the flashlight flickering in the dark, casting long shadows against the trees. I could see him squinting, his gaze focused on something in the distance, but the light couldn't reach it. His body stiffened, and he whispered, "It's not an animal." At that moment, a chill ran down my spine, and I could see Sarah tense up, her face a shade paler. We all held our breath, waiting for Mike to move. The footsteps grew louder, each step more distinct, more real. They didn't sound like a raccoon or a deer. They were too heavy, too human. "Mike!" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I started to get up, but Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip tighter than usual. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking straight ahead, her eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in her before. Not just fear, there was something more in her gaze. "Don't move," she whispered, barely audible. The air grew colder again, and it was like the forest had gone completely silent, save for those footsteps. My heart raced. I wanted to yell at Mike to come back, to tell him to get away from whatever it was that was out there. But then, there it was, a new sound, a low growl, almost like a rumble coming from the deep of the woods. But it wasn't an animal's growl. No, this was something darker, something that didn't belong in the woods. "Mike!" I called again, this time louder, panic starting to creep into my voice. No answer. The footsteps had stopped. There was only silence. Then, the rustling began again, but now it was closer, moving in every direction, as if the entire forest had come alive. "What is that?" Sarah gasped, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. The sound of footsteps was followed by something worse. A sharp, piercing crack, like a branch snapping under the weight of something massive. And then in the distance, a shadow. It moved fast through the trees, too fast to be human, but too deliberate to be an animal. And just like that, the air shifted. The calm of the evening was gone. What had started as a simple camping trip was now something else. Something far worse. Whatever was out there wasn't just moving around us, it was watching, waiting, and we had no idea what it wanted. I stood there, rooted to the ground, unable to tear my eyes away from the shadow in the trees, when suddenly Mike came running back toward us, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't even speak. He just grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the fire. "We need to go," he said, his voice hoarse. But I didn't move. I couldn't, because whatever it was that had been out there, it was still watching us. and now it was closer than ever before. The air had thickened, weighed down by the unspoken tension that hung between us. Mike was still gripping my arm, pulling me toward the fire, but the way his eyes kept darting to the trees told me that he wasn't sure which way was safe anymore. The footsteps, once distant, were now unmistakably closer. We all heard them, the slow, deliberate steps moving across the forest floor, closer, nearer, until the sound was right on top of us. We were no longer imagining it. We weren't alone. "It's just an animal," Mike muttered again, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. His words felt hollow. Sarah was clutching her knees to her chest now, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't moved, hadn't taken her eyes off the trees, and neither had I. The feeling of being watched, it wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was a certainty. Something out there was watching us. Something with intent. The temperature dropped even further. It wasn't the kind of cold you'd expect from a forest at night. This cold felt wrong, unnatural. I could see my breath puffing in the air, and when I looked at Mike, I noticed his hands were shaking. He was trying to mask it, trying to play it cool, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We all felt it now. The woods had turned from a peaceful refuge into something far darker. The fire, the one thing that had made us feel safe, was flickering erratically, the flames trembling in the windless air. It was as if the fire itself was scared. A gust of wind should have come through, but it didn't. Instead, there was a growing stillness, a dead silence. The rustling had stopped, the footsteps had stopped, but now the woods were watching us in a way that felt personal. It was as though the trees themselves were closing in, their branches reaching toward us, stretching like fingers trying to trap us. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, but her fear was clear. Her eyes were locked on something just beyond the campfire's glow. I turned my head, and my heart skipped a beat. Someone, was there, standing just outside the reach of the light. It wasn't a person, not exactly. There was no shape, no clear outline, just an unsettling presence, an oppressive darkness that seemed to suck in the light around it. I wanted to shout, to call out to Mike, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen. The ground beneath me felt as though it had hardened, as if the earth itself was binding me to this spot, trapping me here with whatever it was that lingered just beyond the firelight. It was close now, so close I could feel the air shift, feel the weight of it pressing down on me, like a storm ready to break. And then there was the sound, a low growl, not from the animal we had been expecting. No, this was deeper, more guttural. It was coming from the trees, right above us. I glanced up, but all I saw were the twisting branches reaching into the black sky. The growl came again, closer now, almost as if it was circling us, moving from tree to tree, drawing closer with every passing second. My heart was pounding so loudly, I thought it might drown out everything else. Sarah was trembling now, her body shaking uncontrollably, and I could hear Mike's breathing quicken, sharp and ragged, as if he was trying to fight the panic that was setting in. We were all on edge. We all felt it. Something was coming for us, and we couldn't escape it. The footsteps started up again, this time not from a distance, but right behind us. Every step echoed in the silence, getting closer, coming faster, until I thought I could feel the ground vibrating under my feet. My legs finally moved, but it was like wading through thick mud, the fear weighing me down. "We need to leave," Mike finally said, but there was no certainty in his voice. He wasn't giving orders anymore. He was pleading. But where would we go? The woods were closing in on us, and the deeper we went, the more lost we'd be. The rustling started again, but it was no longer just a sound. It was a presence moving through the trees, all around us, closing in, making the air thicker, heavier, like something had settled over us, dark and suffocating. The trees seemed to sway in rhythm with the growing sound, but there was no wind, no breeze, just the oppressive sway of something unseen, something dark. And the fire flickered violently again, the flames shifting wildly, as if even the light was afraid of what was out there. We weren't alone, not anymore. The forest had become something else, something alive, something that wasn't just watching us. It was waiting for us to make a move, to break the silence. And just as I thought I could feel my heart stop in my chest, the figure in the shadows moved. It wasn't human, not like us. It was taller than any person I'd ever seen, too tall for a man, too thin, almost like it was bending into the trees themselves, a grotesque silhouette. It moved in jerky, unnatural motions, like it was barely tethered to the ground at all. And when it stepped forward, there was no sound. Nothing at all. Just an endless, creeping darkness closing in on us. The forest had become a prison. The air was thick, and the darkness felt like it was pressing against us from all sides. We couldn't hear anything now, no footsteps, no rustling leaves, only the pounding of my heart, loud enough to drown out the silence. My mind was racing, but it was too slow to keep up with the terror that was closing in on us. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. We were trapped. The shadow in the trees was no longer just a flicker of darkness. It had become something solid, something real. And then it moved. The ground beneath us seemed to tremble, just a slight shift, but enough to send a wave of panic through me. I looked at Sarah, but her face was a mask of pure terror, her eyes wide, locked onto the same thing I was staring at, something that was emerging from the shadows. A figure. A silhouette, tall and unnaturally thin, standing just at the edge of the firelight. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the figure stepped forward, and the shadows around it seemed to bend and twist, warping as if the darkness itself was alive. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else entirely. A twisted nightmare brought to life. Its shape was wrong, too long, too thin. It seemed to stretch and shrink with every step it took. Its body was an unnatural shade of black, like the depths of a starless void, with no discernible features except for those eyes. Those eyes, pale, hollow, like two orbs of moonlight, glowing faintly in the dark. They fixed on me, on us, with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, trapped in the gaze of whatever this thing was. My mind screamed at me to run, to do something, anything, but my legs refused to obey. My hands were cold, my heart racing in my chest, pounding like it was trying to escape my ribcage. It came closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was struggling to stay connected to the earth. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was as if it was drawing me in, pulling me into its orbit, and the closer it got, the more I could feel something dark, something wrong, filling the space around us. The air was thick with it now, heavy with dread and unspoken fear. The fire flickered again, casting strange shadows that danced across its form, making it seem even more otherworldly. Mike was the first to snap out of his trance. "We need to move," he whispered urgently, but his voice shook, and I knew he didn't believe what he was saying. He didn't believe we could outrun this thing. I could see it in his eyes. He was terrified too. But the thing, whatever it was, didn't respond to us. It didn't lunge at us or make any sudden movements. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I wanted to ask it what it wanted. I wanted to scream at it, to demand it leave us alone. But the words stuck in my throat, like they were trapped in the same dark place this thing had come from. It wasn't just standing there, it was feeding on our fear. The longer we stood frozen, the closer it got. And the more I realized that running wouldn't save us. This thing, it didn't want to kill us. No, it wanted us to feel this fear, to feel it suffocate us from the inside out. And then, without warning, it moved again. A sudden, swift motion that left me breathless. It took a step forward, and I felt the ground beneath me shift. Not physically, but emotionally, like the world was tilting, like everything I knew was being turned upside down. The fire flickered once more, and in that brief moment of light, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was close now. It was standing right in front of us, its twisted form towering over us, its hollow eyes staring straight into mine. And for the first time, I realized I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. It was beyond comprehension, a shape from a nightmare, from a place where no human mind could go. I could feel it pulling me in, drawing me closer, the air thick with its presence. The temperature dropped even more, and I swear I could see my breath mist in front of me. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing: it was hungry. Hungry for our fear, hungry for something more than just our lives. And that's when I knew. We were not just in the woods. We were inside something far older, far darker. This wasn't just a campsite. It was a place of reckoning, a place where something ancient had decided to make its stand. And we were just intruders, trespassing on land that had been forgotten by time, but remembered by what had lived there long before we ever arrived. Mike stepped back, his breath shallow, his voice barely a whisper. "Run," he said, but the word came out wrong. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, but it was too late. The thing in front of us moved again, and this time, there was no escape. No chance of outrunning it. All we could do was stand there, paralyzed, as it crept closer, its eyes never leaving ours, never blinking, as if it was waiting for the exact moment we'd give in. And that moment was coming faster than I was ready for. The silence that followed the growl was deafening. Every one of us was frozen, caught in the spell of that eerie presence, too terrified to speak, to move, or even to breathe. It was like the forest had ceased to exist, leaving only the oppressive darkness and that thing, waiting in the shadows. I could feel the weight of its gaze on me, heavy and unrelenting, like it was seeing through me. I glanced around at Mike and Sarah, but neither of them looked at me. They were both staring into the same darkness, their faces pale and frozen in fear. It was as if something had gripped their very souls, locking them in place. Their eyes were wide, filled with terror, but neither of them could bring themselves to speak. And then, suddenly, the ground trembled beneath our feet. A low, rumbling shake that sent vibrations through the earth, through my bones, like the forest itself was shifting. The fire flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows, as if it, too, were terrified of what was coming. My heart hammered in my chest, my throat tight, as I stood there, unable to move. And then, from the deepest shadows of the woods, something stepped forward. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The shadows seemed to bend and shift in unnatural ways, making it hard to make out its form. But then it took another step, and the truth became undeniable. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something other, something that shouldn't exist. It emerged slowly, gliding across the ground, its form twisted, its limbs too long, too thin, like the branches of the trees themselves had taken shape and walked out of the darkness. It was the color of pitch-black night, a void that seemed to absorb the light from the fire and bend it around its shape. I could see no face, no eyes at first, just an endless stretch of darkness, and then, those eyes. They weren't eyes in the way we understand them. They were orbs of pale, ghostly light, glowing faintly, like dying stars. They weren't looking at us. They were piercing us, as though they could see into the very core of who we were, who we had been, and what we feared most. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to do anything to escape, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, caught in its gaze, my body betraying me. It took another step, and this time I saw it more clearly, the impossibility of its form. It was as though it was made of the darkness itself, but there were hints of something ancient, something monstrous in its twisted movements. The way it moved didn't seem like it had anything to do with the ground beneath it. It slid. It floated closer, its limbs jerking in a way that no human body could possibly replicate, and my blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, to yell for Mike, to do something, anything, but no sound escaped my throat. It was as though the very air had been sucked out of the world around us. The only sound was the pounding of my heart, and the fire crackling wildly, spitting embers into the air, as if it, too, was trying to fight the presence. And then it spoke. The voice, if you could call it a voice, was a rasping whisper, like the wind itself had come alive, and was speaking in a tongue older than time itself. "You trespass where you should not," it said, its voice not coming from any lips, but from everywhere, from every direction. I could feel it vibrating in my skull, in my chest, as though it was inside me. Mike moved first. He didn't say a word, but I saw him step back, his hand reaching for the flashlight, as if he could somehow use it as a weapon. But he wasn't fast enough. Before he could even lift it, the figure was upon him. I watched in horror as Mike collapsed, falling to his knees as if something had suddenly drained all his strength. He was gasping for breath, but the air seemed thick, almost suffocating. Sarah screamed, and I tried to move, tried to reach out, but my legs wouldn't move. My body was still, paralyzed by fear, by the thing in front of us. The figure loomed over Mike, and then just like that, it was gone. No sound, no movement, just the absence of it, like it had never been there at all. But Mike was still on the ground, gasping for air, his face pale, his eyes wide with something I could never forget. Something more terrifying than anything we had ever imagined. "It's gone," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. But as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. It wasn't gone. It had only shown us a glimpse of itself. And that glimpse had been enough to tear apart the world we thought we knew. Mike pushed himself up slowly, still shaking, but his eyes were different now. Empty, as if something had been taken from him. Something that couldn't be returned. Sarah took a step toward him, her voice trembling. "Mike, are you okay?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there, his face expressionless, his eyes fixed on nothing. I looked at Sarah, my own voice lost in my throat. The forest was silent now, but I knew it wasn't over. We were not alone. We never had been. We turned toward the shadows again, but this time, the darkness was different. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was a promise. A promise that whatever it wasn't done with us yet. We didn't speak as we moved through the trees, our steps quick and frantic, each one louder than the last in the suffocating silence. Mike was still trembling, his body stiff, like a man who had seen something he couldn't unsee. Sarah had her hand on his shoulder, guiding him, but she wasn't much better off. Her eyes were wide, darting from shadow to shadow, as if expecting something to leap from the darkness at any moment. We didn't look back. We couldn't. Whatever we had seen out there in the woods was too real, too powerful to confront. It was enough to know that we needed to escape. We stumbled through the trees, the forest seeming to close in on us, the very air thick with the weight of what had happened. The closer we got to the edge of the woods, the more the sense of being watched grew. It was like it was following us, keeping pace, lingering just beyond the trees, as if it was content to let us think we had escaped. But I knew better. The woods hadn't released us. It was still there, watching, waiting. When we finally reached the edge of the forest, we stopped, breathing heavily, our hearts still racing. The quiet was almost suffocating after the terror we had just witnessed. But something was wrong. Something still didn't feel right. Mike collapsed to the ground, his face pale and drawn, his hands shaking as he tried to catch his breath. I stood next to him, staring into the dark woods, waiting for something, anything, to move. But the forest was still. Too still. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the terror still coiling around me, tightening like a noose. "We made it out," I said, but the words felt empty. There was no triumph in them, no relief. Just a hollow, aching emptiness. Then out of the corner of my eye I saw it, a small glint of something on the ground. I froze. My blood turned cold as I turned toward it. A piece of fabric, tattered and stained, lying at the edge of the woods, half hidden in the undergrowth. I stepped forward, my feet heavy, as if I were being pulled toward it by some unseen force. I knelt down and picked it up. It was a scrap of clothing, torn and worn, with a strange symbol drawn on it. My hands trembled as I held it up to the light, trying to make sense of it. The symbol was crude, jagged, but unmistakable, something ancient, something that had no place in the modern world. It looked like it had been carved into the fabric with something sharp, something that had been done with intent. I turned it over, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw something else. On the back of the scrap of cloth, there was a word. One word that sent a chill down my spine. You. I dropped the fabric, my hands shaking, my heart racing again as the implications hit me. The thing we had encountered in the woods, whatever it wasn't done with us. It hadn't been satisfied by our fear. It had marked us, and now it was coming for us again. We looked at each other, and the realization hit us all at once. We hadn't escaped. We had been chosen, and this was only the beginning. The forest hadn't let go of us. It had just let us think we were free. And as we turned to leave, the last thing I heard was the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the distance, getting closer, echoing through the trees. It wasn't over. It had only just begun. So, what do you think it was? Was it an ancient spirit that's been lurking in the woods for centuries? Or something darker? Something that's been waiting for the right moment to make its presence known? Could the forest itself be alive, holding on to something from the past? What does that symbol on the cloth mean? And why was it marked with the word you? What does it want from us? Leave your theories in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think, and if you've ever experienced something like this, share your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next spine-chilling tale. You might just find that the woods aren't as far away as you think. Stay tuned. The story isn't over, not by a long shot.